Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Albert Ugas. I'm an appraiser with AVSO, and we're going to talk a little bit about appraisals, but primarily, really what I want to talk about is land and what exactly it represents. And so we're going to engage in a little exercise in trying to peel the onion, if you will, and take a glimpse, if nothing else, at some of the various elements that land brings us. The presentation is going to be broken into three sections. The first section is going to be an introduction, just that you know who we are in terms of AVSO, the Appraisal Office, where we fit in the whole scheme of things, what changes have taken place within DOI during the last few years in terms of what they've done with appraisals. And the middle section is going to talk about land. And full disclosure, I'm going to play a little game with you, specifically with your brain, because I want to invite us all to look at things a little bit differently. So that will be the middle section, land. And then the third section will talk a little bit, to the extent that you're even interested, on Public Law 93-638 and what exactly it does and so forth. So let's get started. Let's see if I can figure out how to turn this on. So I work for the Appraisal and Valuation Services Office. And for some of you, that might be something new. You might be more familiar with the old office, which used to be the Office of Appraisal Services, working under the Office of the Special Trustee. That no longer exists. And within AVSO, I specifically work for the Office of Tribal Sovereignty, which is, quite frankly, it's a brand new office. It used to be the Office of the Associate Deputy Director. Now it's the Office of Tribal Sovereignty. Now, AVSO. If you will recall, the Indian Trust Asset Reform Act, ITARA, in 2016, mandated that the appraisals of Indian trust property be administered by a single bureau or agency within AVSO, within Department of Interior. Interior used to have two appraisal offices. The former OVS, Office of Appraisal Services, or Valuation Services, that dealt with the Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, and so forth, other bureaus within DOI. And there used to be the Office of Appraisal Services under the auspices of the Office of the Special Trustee that had a single focus and dealt exclusively with appraisals in Indian country. So ITARA decided that that was not a good setup, and we want to combine all the appraisals in one office. And so that's what they did. Secretarial Order 3363, signed in March of 2018, established formally AVSO. Now, aside from the services provided to Indian country, AVSO at large serves other bureaus within DOI: National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, Reclamation, Land Management, etc. So now it is one agency that does not only Indian country, but all the other federal agencies within DOI as well. Now, multiple divisions within AVSO provide services to BIA on behalf of Indian tribes and Alaska consortiums. Now, a little bit of history so that we're all on the same page. Prior to 2002, The appraisal office used to be part of BIA. That stopped as of 2002. At the time, there were 24 tribes that had taken on the appraisal program on their own. A whopping 4% of the 574 federally recognized tribes. That's a pathetic number in case you didn't get from my perspective, it should be 100%. But in any event, as of 2002, we were at 4%. In 2002, OAS was taken away from BIA and put under the auspices or the umbrella of the Office of the Special Trustee. And that was the case from 2002 until 2018. In 2016, ITARA is enacted. By this time, 11 additional tribal appraisal programs have exercised their self-determination. Now we're up to a whopping 6%. In 2018, DOI consolidates OVS and OAS into AVSO. 2019, one additional tribal appraisal program takes on, one additional tribe takes on their appraisal program. We're still at 6%. And after 2019, we switched from the old system, OASIS, which is what most tribes used to interact with to get their appraisal data, appraisal requests, and so forth. Now there's a new system. It's called AVSO. AVSO is restructured. We had, former OAS had 8 regional offices, and with appraisers that were concentrated on that region and worked with all the clients within that region. Now AVSO has been restructured. There are only 3 regions: Western, Central, and Midwest. Is that the way it goes? Thank you. So anyway, there's 3 regions, and there's a stable of appraisals in each one of those 3 regions. They service not only Indian country, but wherever the appraisal requests come from, whether they're Park Service, Reclamation, whomever. So the requests go into OASIS, and as they come in, they get dealt with by the appraisal staff. First come, first served basis, I guess. And the office of the Associate Deputy Director becomes Office of Tribal Sovereignty. So that's a timeline, so that everybody's well aware of how much things have changed in the last few years. Now, the Office of Tribal Sovereignty provides management and oversight for the 638 programs. We have a total of 30 self-governance compacted programs and 6 self-determination contracted programs. We partner with BIA and the Office of Self-Governance to administer the tribal appraisal programs. AVSO is the entity that determines the tribal share funding, and we'll talk a little bit about that further down. We provide technical appraisal assistance, and we maintain MOUs with most programs. These MOUs serve as the statement of work and are integral to the annual and multi-annual funding agreements for those programs. The office vision is to promote and support genuine Indian self-determination and self-governance through dynamic partnerships with tribes and Alaska Native consortiums, with BIA, and with the Office of Self-Governance. We aim to become the cornerstone for the building of successful, independent tribal appraisal programs operating under 638. We achieve this by providing timely and quality customer support, training, advice, consultation, technical assistance. We further serve to intercede as delegate and mediator on valuation Indian issues for all other Indian trust and restricted fee lands across Indian country. That's the hope for this office. The tribal share formula. The workload-based formula was established in 2011 through tribal consultations by a work group comprised of tribal and government officials and was approved by the special trustee, 2011. The formula is based on the workload of each individual tribe in relation to AVSO's regional office workload. It is comprised of the 5-year average number of appraisals completed by the tribe in relation to the 5-year average number of appraisals completed by the regional office, and that fiscal year's beginning budget allocation for that particular regional office. 80% is allocated pro rata based on the share of the regional workload, and 20% residual is set aside for non-governmental inherent functions. So part of the agreement with this, when this original formula was devised, was that there would be no changes ever to that formula absent tribal consultations. Now, you could make the argument that when AVSO or DOI decided to change the composition of the appraisal office from 8 regional offices to 3 regional offices, that in and of itself elicits a change on the formula. And it is my understanding that the department is in the process of beginning to schedule and coordinate tribal consultations to discuss that tribal share allocation again through formal tribal consultations. That's where that's at. There are a number and a host of reasons why it is in the best interest of every tribe to own their own appraisal programs. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. It is a game changer. It should be a game changer, because you need to be the masters of your own destiny and not be subjected to others' timelines. Land is too important for that. But just to give you a taste of what is possible, I just give you here a couple of success stories. Like, for example, a tribe in Arizona that has its own land use planning and appraisal departments. Once you begin to take ownership of this management, you begin to develop the skills to be able to manage those assets in a more professional way. These departments efficiently support the development and leasing of extensive prime commercial real estate areas, transforming them into powerful economic engines for their communities. You cannot wait for others to do it for you. There's a tribe in Oregon that has been contracted for the mass appraisals of hundreds of properties during the past 5 years. They use these appraisals to effect the purchase with their own funding of fractionated interests, thus increasing the tribally owned and controlled landmass. You should be the one that determines what happens within your borders. context for those that want to discuss. I was supposed to be here, by the way. Eldred Lesansee, the Associate Deputy Director and the head of the Office of Tribal Sovereignty, was supposed to be here talking to you, but unfortunately he came down with a bug and was unable to travel, so you're stuck with me. Eldred has been, used to be the director of the former office, OAS, and has over 25 years of appraisal experience. There's his phone number. And yours truly, my formal title now is Tribal Sovereignty Officer. I am relatively new to the federal workforce. I was specifically hired for the land buyback program, specifically to help set up and manage the mass appraisal component. And now that the buyback program is done, I was invited to join Eldred and help set up this Office of Tribal Sovereignty. Because I'm a really old guy, I have over 30 years of appraisal experience, and there's my phone number. So enough of us. Now let's talk about our homelands. Let me start with this, because I think that we need to set our minds properly if we're going to talk about our homelands. And I'm going to start with a quote. Our land is more valuable than your money. It will last forever. It will not even perish by the flames of fire. As long as the sun shines and the waters flow, this land will be here to give life to men and animals. We cannot sell the lives of men and animals. Therefore, we cannot sell this land. It was put here for us by the Great Spirit, and we cannot sell it because it does not belong to us. You can count your money and burn it within the knot of a buffalo's head, but only the Great Spirit can count the grains of sand and the blades of grass of these plains. As a present to you, we will give you anything we have that you can take with you. But the land? Never. Chief Crowfoot, Blackfeet. He was onto something. He saw something on the land that is more than just a blade of grass. There's far more to it. And that's what I mean when I say we need to be willing to peel that onion and really understand all the various elements that are at play whenever we talk about our homelands. Now, I'm originally from Peru, and I was down there in February. I felt the call, and I needed to go back there. I had not been back there for 15 years. So I went, and no, I didn't stay in the city. I got the heck out of Dutch. I went up into the mountains and spent some time up there. So I'm gonna use just a small handful of pictures to help convey the message about the land. This here is a picture on one of the trails I like to hike, and I did a lot of hiking during February. And it's not an uncommon sight that you come across rocks stacked on the side of the trail. They're there for a purpose, for a reason. Oops, pushed the wrong button. So a couple of terms. And this is Quechua words, which is the language of my ancestors. Pacheta. A pacheta is an offering. And this offering is made to Apu, which is the mountain spirit. It is tradition that when you're going on a hike and you're coming to a mountain, you make an offering of respect to Apu. That offering can be a bead, a flower, whatever. And you ask Apu for permission to go through his or her land for safe passage. There's something to the land that transcends us all, and we need to be able to see that. It is not just the beauty of the natural environment, although that beauty feeds us, reinvigorates us. There's something more than just that. On many levels, there's a primal spiritual connection. We don't live to work. We work to live. And the land teaches us that. It is a cycle that has existed from the beginning of time. It forces us to go beyond ourselves and to harness things around us so that we can communicate, commune, if you will, with that land. And notice, these are all recent pictures from last February. Notice on that upper corner picture, those retaining walls that have probably been up there for centuries. The gifts from our ancestors that we keep working and we keep molding and we keep harvesting the bounties. Native people are America's most rural population, with tribal lands covering over 5% of the nation's land base, an area that would make Indian country the nation's fourth largest state. The relationship between tribes and their lands is complex, extending from time immemorial to the present day and beyond. Tribal governments demonstrate excellence caring for the land and natural resources with respect, despite often having inadequate financial resources. Tribes look to this critical asset to provide and to support essential elements of native life and culture, from subsistence hunting, fishing and gathering, to spiritual life and economic development. Tribal lands are most often the tribe's most significant asset. But cumbersome bureaucratic barriers undermine their capacity to fully realize the benefit from these resources. Why do we allow that? Now, I told you I was going to play games with you in your head. I'm reaching in there and I have purposely focused on showing you images and words that are directed to a very specific part of your brain, the limbic portion of our brain, where our values system, our morals, our ethics, what really makes us is centered. Now I'm going to pull that lever and ask you to switch gears. I want you to feel it. When I was looking for an image to convey this, I found this one, which is pretty cool, I guess. But what I was really looking for was a guy pulling on a big lever and these big gears switching over. I told you I'm an old guy. That's what I had in mind. This was the best I could find. But this one is slicker, I guess. So let's change, let's peel that onion, and let's look at land a little bit different for a sec. Land is money. It's not just an idle asset that sits there and does nothing. Land is a seed gifted to us by our ancestors who through blood, sweat, and tears were able to do that. We have been given a seed. What are we doing with it? Now a little bit more of a jarring of the brain. I'm going to introduce a little economic principle that I want you to leave with. And it's the only one, I promise. After that, we'll go back to our limbic side. Velocity of money. The economic principle is based on the simple fact that the sooner you achieve a return on your investment, the sooner you can reinvest that money to compound your wealth towards generating infinite returns. Compounding, but on steroids. That seed gifted to us from time immemorial needs to be working. It cannot be sitting, doing nothing. And we need to develop the expertise, the capacity, the capabilities, the staff to be able to keep it working. It is a money machine that needs to be doing what it was meant to do. If you want to be rich, you need to keep your money moving. The velocity of your money determines the size of your wealth. Think of that seed as that story that I used to read my kids when they were young, the little train that could. All you need to do is start taking ownership of what happens with your lands. Don't let others make those decisions for you. And pretty soon, that money machine is going to be doing what it was always meant to do. Provide for the future of your communities better than anyone else will ever do. How many people are familiar with this image? Show of hands. Well, there's a few. Okay. I call her Lady Dignity. I think it was a very appropriate image to switch gears a little bit and talk about three terms that are, I fear, are very often misunderstood and that I think we all need to be careful with. Her full name, her real name is Dignity of Earth and Sky. Dignity for short. I like Lady Liberty, or Dignity, I'm sorry. It is a 50-foot statue, gifted. It depicts a Dakota woman in the process of draping a traditional quilt over her shoulders. She's made of stainless steel. She sits on a bluff overlooking the Missouri River, just south of Crow Creek, Lower Brule, Yankton. And it is an homage to the dignity of Native peoples. A lady whom I don't know who she is, but a reporter asked this lady about what her impression of Lady Dignity was. And I quote her, I don't know who this lady is, but I love her. She said this: she stands strong and proud. She owns a spine of steel and reminds me of strength, perseverance, and survival. She signifies a people who have prevailed through the centuries. She's spot on. The three terms that I want to discuss a little bit are fiduciary. Contrast that to stewardship. And out of that, what do we make of sovereignty? So, let's start with fiduciary. What is a fiduciary? Someone who administers property or money for someone else. As a fiduciary, you are legally required to manage the other person's assets for their benefit, not yours. Now, whether you work in tribal government or you work for the federal government, most of us, to some extent, have fiduciary responsibilities. And this is what they are. Fiduciary has 4 basic duties: to act only on the other's best interest, to manage the asset carefully and diligently, to keep the asset separately from others, and to provide good records and reports. Now, bear with me. I want to ask you a question. What, with one word, only one word, what do you get out of this? What's that word that first comes to mind? Come on, anybody? Responsibility. Come on, guys, wake up. I'm sorry? Integrity. Error? Care. Thank you. I'm sorry? Trust. All right. Thank you. Let's look at the second word. Well, before we do that, I want to suggest to you that looking at this, perhaps we ought to consider kicking it up a notch. Yes, if you fulfill your responsibilities as a fiduciary, you're not going to get in trouble with anybody. But when you look at the legacy, at the pain, blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors generations ago, are we doing everything that we ought to be doing? Is fiduciary enough? Or is there a higher calling? that perhaps we ought to be listening to every once in a while. Steward, someone who takes care of something and protects it, as the dictionary definition. Now, those two terms are underlined because I think they're demanding a little bit more than a cool relationship. I think they're asking us to put a little bit of our own chips on the table. Stewardship offers 7 advantages. Purview. It demands voluntary and personal standards that are not limited by legalese or regulations. It enables the moral fiber of the individual to be engaged, committed, and to shine through. Heart. Unlike a fiduciary, a steward must invest of his or her own passion and discipline. Courage. Oftentimes, a steward will need to stand alone and speak out when others are not cutting it. Competence. A steward must be able to discern with wisdom and objectivity, which only comes with years of experience, whereas national standards for a fiduciary must necessarily be watered down to fit everyone. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to wait until you're my age to become a steward. You need to take the first step and start that journey. Purpose. A steward is committed to being a beacon of inspiration for moral, ethical, and prudent decision-making. Character. By definition, a steward is regarded as a person of good character. In our brains, complex or abstract concepts, such as those undergirding the fiduciary, are processed in the neocortex portion of our brain. That's the part where we don't feel warm and fuzzy. Passion, love, security, trust, all emotions associated with stewardship are processed in the limbic portion, where the happy hormones oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine are produced. The limbic portion is the seat of the value judgments that we make, often unconsciously, and that exerts such a strong influence in our behavior. That's the part of your brain that I've been trying to reawaken a little. When we drive through life engaged, let me call it a first gear, the neocortex portion of the brain, as the only fuel that drives us, is a problem. We need to be committed. We need to have skin, our own skin in the game. You only do that by engaging the values from your limbic portion of the brain. Which brings us to this term. What is sovereignty? It is only by investing all of ourselves that we truly become sovereign. The actions of a sovereign person speak louder than words. Sovereign people live lives that are not constrained by other standards They live on a higher plane than that demanded of the masses. And if you accept this, then what do you make of tribal sovereignty? What does it mean? Is it just a slogan that we repeat without assigning any meaning to it? What does it mean? Now, all of these definitions here remain true when you're talking about tribal sovereignty. A tribal nation's right to self-govern, to determine its own way of life, and to live that life on its own lands as freely as possible from outside interference. Tribal sovereignty is inherent. It existed long before the Europeans arrived on these shores. It has existed since tribes came into being, since time immemorial. Sovereignty was never given to tribal nations. It was always theirs to begin with. Tribal sovereignty needs to mean something if we're going to take control of that seed that can generate a money machine for our people. You cannot let cumbersome bureaucratic barriers deter you from the harvesting of that power. Let me introduce this one again and finish with this thought. On the previous slide, I said land is money. The point I'm trying to make to you is that land is the life, the bloodline of your people. And we need to up our game and be far more, what word am I looking for? Adept, engaged in how it is managed. We cannot let others take control over how we manage our homelands. It requires and it demands a higher level of attention from tribal leaders. Okay, now I get off my soapbox. What time is it? Sorry, need to see, wow. So we're gonna talk a little bit about PL 93-638, just some basic highlights, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Anything and everything within reason is open. So, what did I do? PL 93-638 was enacted in 1975. It provides maximum Indian participation in the government and education of its people. It provides for the full participation of Indian tribes in programs and services, and encourages the development of human resources of the Indian people. For those of you that listened to the gentleman who was a law professor, I gathered, and he talked about that Oklahoma case that is going to forever shape the nature of legal understanding of tribal sovereignty versus state and federal government jurisdiction. he talked about Justice Gorsuch on the U.S. Supreme Court and how when he drafted the majority opinion, he specifically said that when you're looking at a law, the most important and oftentimes the only thing that you need to look at is what was the intent of the framers of that law. Because we are government, we tend to mushroom things and add a lot of other extraneous things to what was the original law. We interpreted it. We built regulations and so forth. But when push comes to shove, the only thing that matters whenever there's an argument, specifically here in terms of 93-638 and tribal sovereignty, what was the intent of the framers of that law? These are the statements of finding in the Declaration of Policy of 93-638. The prolonged federal domination of Indian service programs has served to retard rather than enhance the progress of Indian peoples and their communities by depriving them of the full opportunity to develop leadership skills crucial to the realization of self-government, and has denied the Indian people an effective voice in the planning and implementation of programs for the benefit of Indians which are responsive to the true needs of their community. They acknowledge that they have created one hell of a mess, excuse my French, that there is a problem, and that the only way to solve that problem is by cutting you loose, because you know better than anyone else how to manage your affairs. Congress declares its commitment to the maintenance of the federal government's unique and continuing relationship with and responsibility to individual Indian tribes and to the Indian people as a whole through the establishment of a meaningful Indian self-determination policy which will permit an orderly transition from the federal domination of programs to effective and meaningful participation by the Indian people in the planning, conduct, and administration of these programs. That's what the law is meant to do. Give you the ability to take on all of these programs. Don't get hung up on the money that comes along with it. I'm going to tell you from the get-go, there isn't much money for appraisals. But you cannot afford to let that seed that is a catalyst for all sorts of changes in the culture of your communities sit idle simply because they're not giving you enough money. The various compositions of the Act, Title I, which is for Indian self-determination, and Title IV, which is tribal self-governments, are really the only two that are pertinent to appraisals. And so we have six tribes that are under Title I currently, and the balance of them 30 that are under Title IV self-governance. Basically, the self-governance, they're doing their own thing. They have been at it for a while. They have shown the ability to manage their affairs, and we don't need to get too involved with them. Title I, they're in the initial stages of taking on the program, and they need to have a track record of a minimum of 3 years without any findings of issues in the administration of the program for them to be able to graduate over to Title IV, where they're pretty much left alone. When you're on Title I, you're considered to be a contracting. When you're on Title IV, it's considered to be a compact between the federal government and the tribal nation. Funding agreement eligibility, again, this is all predicated on that formula that we already discussed before, and all of this gets revisited every fiscal year in terms of how much money is going to be available for these programs, whether they are self-governance or self-determination. The formula is the same. That's the portfolio of the 36 tribes, the 6 there under Title I, and the 30 under Title IV. In terms for under 93-638, the criteria as to what can be contracted or compacted, you guys, I think, know the drill. There's that Federal Register notice that appears every year where all the governmental functions that the government has deemed can be contracted out to tribes for their own management are listed. Appraisals is always one of those, the appraisal function, but there's a host of them. And that's another annual process that all of these various functions get listed on the Federal Register every year. We work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, drafting MOUs. We use BIA awarding officials which is basically the contract officer on each one of these individual contracts, and they provide a great help. All of the management of our appraisal contracts is done through our Office of Tribal Sovereignty, but we do use BIA's awarding officials to process these contracts through the federal budgetary systems. We also work with the Associate Secretary, Indian Affairs Office, with their Office of Self-Governance. They are the ones that manage, for the most part, the relationship with the self-governance tribes, Title I, and they are Title IV, I beg your pardon, and for those, the Office of Self-Governance has their own officers that serve as the contracting official. So that's it. That's the extent of my presentation. Now it was sold to you as an appraisal presentation, and I've done very little talk about appraisals, I think. So I want to open it up for everybody as a way of greasing the skids. I have personal questions that I would like to ask you, and let me put those in here. But at the same time, I want to open the floor for anybody that wants to discuss anything related to appraisals too. You guys know what the definition of an appraiser is, right? An appraiser is basically a very opinionated son of a gun. That's what an appraiser is. And so there's a stable of appraisers here in the back of the room. So So please, take your shots at us. That's what we're here for. So those are questions that I would be interested in posing to tribal staff that may be here. What are your frustrations? What's working, what's not working? How can we change it? How can we help you? But if anybody wants to ask questions, and I know you guys are all rushing to the microphone, if you're going to ask questions, I'm supposed to ask you to please use the microphone that is on the table here so that everybody can hear and so that it can make it into the video record. I forgot that there was a video record, otherwise I would have been in my better behavior. But
Good morning.
Good morning.
And I think that you gave a very good presentation as an appraiser.
thank you.
My name is Kathleen Elliott, and I'm from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in northeastern Oregon. I'm on the Land Planning and Protection Commission. This is a question that I asked on Tuesday in the planning basics and all the planners that were in there. And it's also a question that I have for the appraisers that come to our reservations and appraise our properties. As a landowner myself, I don't think that there's enough money to be put on, to be, put on my land if somebody wanted to purchase it. Unfortunately, the situation that I'm in right now with my family, appraisers have come out and put appraisals on our land in order for us to purchase from our own family members that have no interest in moving on to our inherited lands. But in dealing with the appraisers in the past, which is all over with now, where it took years to get an appraisal, when appraisers come onto the reservation, do they take into the consideration the fee landowners that live next door to us to use to appraise the value of our lands? I'm not sure what kind of, your 80-20 formula blew right over my head. I'm not a planner, I'm a landowner, I'm a commissioner appointed by my board of trustees, and I'm also a tribal employee. And so I have no idea how you come in and tell me that my, I'll just put a number out there for my niece and nephew. They purchased their uncle, my nephew's portion of one of our lands, and it was like 3.4 acres for $19,000. Not only that is what bothers me, but like when we're grazing, we're agricultural up in northeastern Oregon, and when a farmer comes in or a rancher comes in and says, I want to put 10 horses on your 25 acres, but the BIA tells me that this is only worth $50 a quarter. I don't know where all these where all these numbers come from. Like I said, how do you tell me that this 3.84 acres is only worth $19,000? It was a good thing for my niece and nephew to purchase, their uncle out for that low amount of money, but it kind of insulted me because, like you said, this was given to me through the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors, of my family. So I just kind of wonder where you get your numbers. Do you get them from the fee landowners, or does the BIA dictate this to us, even though you're telling us that you're not dictating to us? It's really confusing for me. So I don't know if anybody has any answers to that question.
I'll be happy to give it a first stab, and if anybody in the room wants to jump in after that, they're more than welcome to it. But you need to understand what that appraisal says. The appraisal is giving you an estimate of the fair market value of the property. whether it's 3.5 acres or whatever size that is. And so fair market value is a very specific term, and it has a definition. There's criteria that needs to be met in order to qualify as fair market value. And so it has to be based on transactions that are open, in an open and competitive market, a willing buyer, a willing seller, no undue stress to either sell or buy. There's a series of criteria that has to be met. And no, it is not limited only to tribal land. It is open market, whether it's tribal or fee lands. So no, you ask a question, let me answer it first, and then we can go back and forth. So that's all the appraisal is giving you. It is an estimate on the appraiser's opinion of what the fair market value for that property is, and hopefully the appraiser did his or her job, and they have plenty of market evidence to support that estimate of value. But it is not a number that is dictated by anybody. It is what the appraiser is deriving out of the market evidence available to him or her.
Okay.
Did that
so-
answer your question?
Yes, in a way. So
a way.
I've sold a home before. I
Okay.
lived in Oakland, California for 30 years. When I got ready to move back home, I sold my home, and this was back in 2005, just before the market crashed, the last time it crashed. And so I had an appraiser come out and look at my home, and he appraised my home at $350,000.
Okay.
I walked away with a check for $550,000.
He wasn't a very good appraiser.
Yes, it was. But, you know, I mean, like I said, it was, but he, in the appraisal paperwork that he gave me pictures of the house next door. He gave me a picture of the house across the street, of down the street, and around the corner. So that's where he takes his appraisal from, even though I may have had more improvements to my home. Regardless, he still appraised it as what was comparable. And so that's why I'm asking, my 40 acres that I can trace back to 1855 through my family, how it's come down. So this is appraised at what is over here next door, what's across the road, across the railroad tracks. Is it the same way? Appraisers, doesn't matter where they're in the city or the country, they still use the same kind of parameters.
Yes, but let me tell you this. You have a different attachment to your 40 acres.
Correct.
There's a cultural, spiritual dimension to that attachment that you can simply not quantify,
Correct.
right? And so the estimate of market value is not going to factor what is the worth of your emotional, cultural, spiritual attachment to that property. It's not going to be part of that estimate of market value, because the estimate of market value is answering the question, what would a typical buyer pay for this property? And I'm sorry, as important as these cultural, spiritual, emotional attachments are to you, nobody's going to pay 2 cents for it. Because when they go and get those 40 acres, they're not going to have that level of attachment to the property. Right?
I agree. I guess my question is, a part of my confusion is with the appraisers that are from your office now that are called the AVSO. But you're still part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, part of the Department of Interior? You're no longer part of the Department of Interior?
Yeah, we're part of the Department of
Okay.
Interior, but we're independent from BIA.
Okay. So when somebody comes, this is, because I don't know. I've never purchased property. I mean, purchased a house, that's different. I don't know how that, my husband then took care of all that. But, so if I were to say I was wanting to sell my 40 acres and your appraiser come and told me, well, the fair market value is $200,000, that's the fair market value, that doesn't mean I have to accept that amount.
No,
Okay,
nobody's forcing you to accept anything.
okay, that's just one of my questions, because like where, sometimes the person that works in our Bureau of Indian Affairs office, our director or whatever his role is, the one that takes up space in the office, he, doesn't really let people know that you can negotiate. He just tells them this is what it's appraised at, and that's it. So I think that there needs to be more education for our landowners that want to maybe sell to the tribe or sell to family members or sell to a non-Indian, if that's, if they can do that, that they can negotiate, that there's not just because the Department of Interior comes in, your AVSO people come in and say, well, it's only worth $200,000, that's your fair market value. As a seller, I think that a lot of tribal people need to be educated that they can negotiate.
Yeah, but what you're saying is true, but I think that there may be somewhat of a confusion in Umatilla, because the land buyback program made several rounds of offers
Right.
in Umatilla. In that instance, the department was bound by whatever the appraised value was. This is the offer, take it or leave it.
Right.
You don't have to take it if you don't want it, but this is all we can offer. But if it was outside of the buyback program and somebody's trying to buy your land, yes, you're under no compulsion to sell if you don't want to. But,
Yeah, well, let's not talk about the land buyback program.
thank you.
Hello, I'm Desiree from Tulalip, and I'm curious, how does the AVSO get their market value from areas that they don't actually work in? They come from a different state, they come to Washington or other states, and are they are they getting MLS? Is there a special database that they work out of for trust property? I mean, where do they get the market data for the fair market value? Because it does seem low as I work on the outside to what, if it's in the MLS, the values are higher. If it's an appraisal through AVSO, or even like I think we probably have one of the worst appraisers that does appraisals for tribal members and local. And in fact, I don't even think you guys will let him do appraisals anymore or approve them through the AVSO, but he has systematically devalued tribal property over these last several years that I've worked with him. So I'm just curious, where does that data come from? And, second part of that question is he doesn't even value the land at all. He is doing a cost approach based on replacement. Like if it's a home on the land, he's doing it by cost approach, which makes zero sense to me that you're not giving value to trust land. I don't know if you can.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to give you a quick answer and then a longer answer. The quick answer is, we're the government. We know everything. But having said that, I don't know who this appraiser is. I don't know the the specifics of the appraisal you're talking about. Zane, I don't know if you want to chime in and answer the question as to where the data comes from and the...
Yeah, so, thanks,
Zane, for the benefit of the gentleman that is filming, if you don't mind walking to the microphone, yes. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
No, it's fine. So my name is Zane Stone. I'm the regional lead appraiser for the West, which includes Washington and Oregon. And the data sources that we use in doing it, and so there's a couple things. There's two things that we do. Sometimes we contract appraisals out, and sometimes we do them in-house. If we have the data to do it in-house, we will do it in-house. The data sources that we get come from local MLSs. It comes from other like surveys, industry surveys, real estate surveys, direct comparables. It comes from assessor's office that are in the county. All of that gets filtered, looked at, verified in the same way that it would in the private sector, and then we move forward with it. I do think that there sometimes is a misunderstanding with some contract appraisers because you said this has systematically devalued your property. I have been aware of some people being like, well, you're setting a floor. No, we're not setting a floor. We're setting a fair market value. So if you ever hear somebody say, we're setting a floor, that's not true. That should be going out, and I don't know that situation. I stepped into this role in January, so I'm still kind of getting caught up on things. So we'll talk later. But that's kind of the data sources you're looking at. And to be honest with you, if we do not have the data, we're going to try to like contract that out somewhere. The other issue is when you get into Indian country and you're in very rural areas, MLS data is not very good. I think we're probably going to end up in a situation, and I don't want to go too heady on this, but if interest rates are rising, oftentimes there's not going to be as many trades in the open market, which means that your assessor's information is not going to be as good, meaning the assessor's record in the county is not going to be very good because there's not many sales that are happening, and we can't verify that many. So then it creates a time issue that we have to make an adjustment for. And that's when things can get really varied in a big way.
I know that when you sell on the MLS, you cannot list tribal trust lands because you're limited to who you can sell it to, and the MLS won't let you do that.
Yeah.
So I don't see how you can be pulling the data from the MLS of these similar sales because they're not in the MLS.
Because you're saying trust, because they're trust?
Trust or, tribal member to tribal member.
Yeah, so, well, a couple things, and there's going to be a lot of other people that can talk on this in this room as well. When you get into trust land, and we're looking at it from the standpoint of unified ownership. We're looking at it from a standpoint as if it were in fee, even though it is in trust, because if we were to do it as in trust, then it creates actually an encumbrance on the property, which then would actually could create a value situation that wouldn't be open market. Do you see what I'm saying? So we're trying to undo this one thing that could be hindersome to the process and the value. And so if you do, one of the education things is if you do have a contract appraiser that comes in and they're like, well, it's in trust, so there's already an inherent like bundle of rights, the bundle of rights, there's already a stick taken away from it because it's in trust and there's not fee ownership. You're like, no, you're valuing this as if it is under a single unified ownership and can be traded in the open market. So there is an educational process that needs to happen to contractors on that as well. And if we haven't done a good enough job on that, that's on us, and we need to make sure that we do that. But I think most contractors that work for us have understood that. And again, folks, help me out on that if I'm wrong. but that's kind of where I would roll it.
No, our
Yeah.
appraiser, you can't tell him anything. He won't hear you.
He won't.
Not you guys. He's outside. He's a contractor.
Yeah. Well, and the other
But he's
thing.
the only one that will do appraisals on trust land.
Yeah, let's talk. But the other thing about appraisers, Albert's right. You can't go through the process without being kind of beat up a little bit, and so you do get very opinionated on where you're at. The thing is, you have to, like anything, you have to be willing to look at new data to reassess something to be like, is this correct or not? And you have to have a level head enough to do that. That's personality. It's not, as opposed to mechanics of appraisers in general.
Then my last quick question, and I don't know if probably everyone else knows this, but if I asked for an appraisal today, but I don't get an appraisal for a year and a half, what are you evaluating? Are you evaluating it from the day I ask it, because that's what the buyer and seller, or are you valuing it from a year and a half from now? Because that would definitely change, like if you looked in the last 5 years, that would have definitely changed the value considerably, this value over here.
Yeah. So there's two questions in that. One is in my opinion, probably a process issue, which would be like from the time I request it with BIA or the time I request it with AVSO, what's the time delay that happens in that? That's a different question. If you're talking about to like the date, effective date of value, it would be, it depends on the use of the appraisal. So for instance, in a probate, it would be from the date of death, right? So even if it is 2 years later, I hope that's not the case, but if it is 2 years later, it's going to be from the date of death. Same thing with like natural disasters. If something happens, it's going to be from the date prior to the natural disaster, and then maybe prior to the date after that natural disaster. And that could be 3 years ago. If you're talking about a transaction, it's going to be the most current date. That it's going to be the effective date of the date that the inspection occurred or that the appraiser went out, and that's going to be clearly identified in the report. The other issue would be if you have tried to get an appraisal and it has taken that long, there's probably an administrative issue that like needs to be streamlined somewhere.
And so my last, I swear to the last one, is it would be nice then if when that appraisal request was entered into the system, that we could immediately or within, say, a week, get back, say, hey, we're not going to be able to do this for 16 months. So that way the people that had requested it can go out and contract out their own and get that taken care of, as opposed to, because we don't, we haven't done it much because we usually will hire an appraiser or find somebody. But I know travel members, they don't. They will wait and wait and wait, and they don't hear, and then it's a year later, and they're still wondering, well, where are we at in the process? So if we could find out, you know, because I know you guys, there's limited, you know, you have limited staff just like everywhere else, and if we could find out quicker how long it will really take, then they have the opportunity of going out and getting someone else to do it if they want.
Right, like
or waiting because it's not going to cost them anything.
Like a real-time feed on it. Yeah, and so part of the, to get into that, again, I think that's multifaceted depending on where you're at. You have my card, you can call me, you can call a few of us to kind of get updates on it, but that's a patchwork. That's not like a way for everybody to get in to fix it. I will say that recently we've gone from Oasis. Does everybody remember the legacy program of Oasis that you would put things in? We've gone to something called AVSO, which is a different formatting, processing software that keeps up with workflow. It's a Salesforce platform. And so in real time, our appraisers and staff are supposed to be keeping up with each project when it's in their queue, right? And be like, hey, you know, done this and this on this project, and anyone, whether it be BIA, whether it be someone who can plug into that terminal, can see the process of where they're at on this. And so there's like a tracking bar. Does that make sense? So there's like 13 things, and you'd be like, where is it? Okay, it's at stage 3, but it needs to get to stage 13. But you have to have access to that portal. And again, I don't know what like how you get access to that, like who is eligible for that access. I know BIA should have it for sure. We all have it. Certain travel realty offices have it, but I don't know, you know, outside of that, where that ends. That's probably Albert, do you know?
Yeah, no, actually, anybody that has access to the appraisal modules should be able to access that timeline data. But Avis is a relatively new animal, and everybody's trying to figure out how to ride that bug. So it's a work in progress.
It's relatively new in Indian country. Federal lands have used it for a long time. The Avis process? Yeah, there is some, it's a better, I'm just gonna say, it is a better system than Oasis, but there is an educational curve limit.
On Oasis, and then we create a brand new one, and we haven't even got the old one started yet.
Yeah.
Waiting for appraisals and waiting for appraisals and waiting. Where's it at? In your office? There's no timeline. I've already got the appraisal done. now it's sitting right in your office for somebody to figure out how to work the system.
There, I guess it went live maybe November of last year, is that right? And so there is an educational curve on that. But again, it's hard for me to get onto that, that particular issue. But it does give you a real time, it is better. It wasn't a decision I made, but it's one that was made. And I will say, I think it is better as far as like keeping up with status of things. Just in time, just give it, 18 more months, or give it 18 months from November, what I'd say. Not for the appraisal, hopefully, but for the system, the platform.
All right, thank you. Anybody, any questions? Anybody wants to answer any of those questions? Sounds like you have an opinion. Get on the mic, tell me. Yeah. So did I understand you correctly that the appraisal is done, but you haven't seen it yet?
Yes, sir. Typically, that is the issue. George Ducharme, Salish Kootenai, Confederate Salish Kootenai Tribes up in northwestern Montana. I'm the LTRO, and I oversee the appraisal program and the survey program and the holy cripe. LTROs take on a real vast area of expertise, and I'll be darned if I really have an expertise in any of them other than my job, LTRO. But I do track appraisals. Our appraisals our assignments go out to be appraised as if fee simple, not trust.
Correct.
Because trust, you've got a limited market.
Correct.
So ours are appraised as if fee simple. That would take care of your problem, really. When you order that appraisal, fee simple. That way you're getting a fair market value of what the market is. Now typically our appraisals are done, and we've been waiting probably a year on some, 6 months on others, and a few have come back like that, and I don't understand why. But really, I think you're right. We're starting to get a handle on the new system, and they are starting to turn around, but boy, it was a stagnant process for a good year and a half.
Yeah.
And people were, George, where's it at? George, where? I have no control. It's out in y'all's office. So really, that's the issue. I will say they're starting to flow now. But I think when you're ordering an appraisal, as if fee simple. And we are a compact tribe, so we contract with local appraisers because we can't get one of y'all to come all the way out from Portland to Montana. So we compact with, I believe we have what? 3 or 4 under contract. They're not right at the reservation.
Right.
They come from outside, basically. Things are moving fairly well. On the appraisal part of it, the review part of it is where we're hanging up. So yeah, I have an opinion.
That's fair, that's fair. And you do know that you do not have to have them reviewed if you so choose.
Well, right, we can do this form, and that's got to be approved. Yeah, but well, go ahead and tell me that all right, I'm going to bypass the review process. Well, I don't know if I'm going to let you bypass it. Well, I ain't going down that road. It's just another darn stalemate as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Yes, I understand that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your candor. Come on, guys, that's all the beating we're going to get? Apparently. Well, thank you very much. You have been a wonderful audience. If I can leave with one thought, that's another Quechua word for you there. Anyaychaiki. Thank you. And the one thought that I would leave you with, regardless of whether you're tribal or federal staff, My question to you is, where are you personally in the process of being a source of inspiration and help to make true tribal sovereignty a reality? Are you feeding the beast that keeps it back, or are you breaking barriers? Thank you very much.